Okay, guys, so here we go with the immune system. And yes, it can be really confusing. It can be really complicated. For our purposes here, I found this PowerPoint, I think, really simplifies it to what we need for our purposes here in this class. Obviously, a full anatomy and physiology class, it would get way more in depth. And then, if you were going to go on and work in an immunologist's office or somebody who treats people with autoimmune diseases, you would need to know a lot more than what you know here. But for this class right here, this should do a pretty good job of helping to explain things. So your immune system, your body has 3 lines of defense, really, against pathogens. And the first line of defense does a really great job most of the time. That's your skin. It prevents pathogens from getting inside of our bodies in the first place. Think of this as like a fence around property or a moat around a castle, if that makes sense to you. The second line of defense, if something gets past the first line, then the second line kicks in. This involves the white blood cells, and these attack and destroy any pathogen that gets through. Think of this as maybe the locked door they have to get through if they manage to get over the fence. And then the third line is the production of special chemicals that target specific pathogens that happen to get past the first 2 lines of defense. This would be, for example, maybe the homeowner standing there with a baseball bat or something else they're going to be using to defending themselves should the person get over the fence and through the locked door. Excuse me. So the first line of defense prevents microbes from entering our body in the first place. Okay, so skin. There's substances on your skin that help to act as a barrier against disease. Remember, we learned that way back at the beginning when we studied the integumentary system. Tears. We learned with the neurosensory system that like the tears for your eyes have a lysosome in them that help fight disease. Saliva, you have certain things in your mouth to help destroy pathogens, and there's also some natural bacteria in your mouth that help keep each other under control, I guess. In your respiratory tract, and we're going to learn about the respiratory tract next week, but there's mucus and cilia. Mucus traps dirt and pathogens, and the cilia helps to move the mucus along so you can get rid of it. Either sneeze it, or lots of times, and you don't even realize you're doing it, the mucus moves, or the cilia moves the mucus up to where you can then swallow it. And then it lands in your stomach, where the stomach acid, which you should have learned when we did the digestive system, stomach acid, the hydrochloric acid, can also destroy pathogens. So should something get past one of those first line of defenses, then your second line kicks in. And this is your immune system. Your immune system or your lymph system is a group of organs and specialized cells that help to protect us from these pathogens. And I just talked about in the previous podcast those organs, the thymus, the spleen, the tonsils, the bone marrow, and the lymph nodes. The lymph really doesn't do anything to protect against disease. The lymph is what carries everything back to be returned to the blood cell. Another name for this is also non-specific immunity or even innate immunity, and it's called innate immunity because these mechanisms are present from birth. You have these things when you're born. The immune system includes the white blood cells, and these white blood cells roam around through your body. They roam freely, and they're always checking things out. They're looking for these pathogens that they need to destroy. There's 2 major types of them, phagocytes and lymphocytes. The phagocytes surround and destroy any pathogen, and then the lymphocytes are the ones they make chemicals that target specific pathogens. Now, we learned about white blood cells last week when we learned about blood and all the different types of blood cells. An immune stem cell, or any stem cell, is a cell that has the capability to become anything. It hasn't been designated yet, it hasn't been specialized. So these stem cells develop into phagocytes and lymphocytes. And then remember, the phagocytes, there's 5 different kinds of them. Oops, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The lymphocytes, there are B cells and T cells. We're going to get more specific on that in a minute. And then the phagocytes, the neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, mast cells, and macrophages. The most important ones of these 5 different types here, these ones, are the neutrophils and the macrophages. Okay, neutrophils roam around the body, but macrophages usually will stay within one specific area or one strategic area. The second line of defense, as I said, involves phagocytes. The invading pathogens trigger the immune system's inflammatory response. So the phagocytes are either roaming around or in one area. When that inflammatory response happens, the phagocytes will move to that area. The way that they infect or destroy a cell is they put out these little projections of their membrane called pseudopods. These pseudopods surround that organism, that bacteria or that virus, whatever it is, and form a little sac called a phagosome. This phagosome then travels to the interior of the cell and fuses with a lysosome. The lysosome contains digestive enzymes, and these enzymes then destroy the microorganism, and then the phagocyte will expel the waste products. When this happens, inflammation, the inflammatory response happens. Signs and symptoms of that are redness, swelling, soreness, and local warmth. And you're going to learn, if you haven't already, if you think an area is infected, one thing to do is to see if it feels warm to the touch. And this is really one of the first signs of an infection. These signs of inflammation and then the local warmth especially, sometimes you'll develop a fever. That's another way your body tries to fight infection, because there are some pathogens that cannot grow or multiply in elevated temperatures. So, should one of those organisms happen to make it past the first and the second lines of defenses, now there's the third line. And this involves antigens, chemicals on the surface of the pathogen that will trigger a much more specific attack. Remember last week when we learned about blood types and the antigens on the red blood cells? This is the same principle. These antigens on the surface of the bacteria are recognized by the body as something that doesn't belong, these little markers that they have. It's kind of like you're the homeowner who an intruder has gotten past the first 2 lines of defense that you had, and now we're to the third line. You recognize that they're not somebody that belongs in your home. So you're going to do something about it. These foreign antigens stimulate the B cells. B cells recognize these antigens and start producing some proteins called antibodies. Same principle as the antibodies that you have for the blood types. These antibodies recognize the antigens, they'll bind to it, they kind of mark it. Make a mark on it or tag it, I guess. And that deactivates the pathogen. However, the pathogen is still there. It's not dead yet, it's just deactivated. This antigen is now marked for destruction by the killer cell. So the way the antibodies work, here's our pathogen. And we're going to a closer look of this. There's the antigen right there on the surface of the pathogen. That's what's marking this as something that does not belong in our body. The B cell sees these things and went, hey, you don't belong here, and moves over and attaches to it, attaches an antibody to it. So it's marked. So these antibodies here are going to attach to this and mark it as a pathogen that needs to be destroyed. Okay, so now here's our pathogen. Its antigens are now marked with antibodies. So the killer cell can track down these antibodies and get rid of them. They're going to recognize these tracks. So again, the antibodies attach to the antigens on the pathogen, deactivate it, and that's a signal for the killer T cells to move in and take care of the rest of it. So let's go back to our person who got over our fence and through our unlocked door, and now they're in your home. You know they're not part of your family or anyone who belongs there because you don't recognize them. They don't have any trait that you know to be a trait of somebody who should be in your house. So you're going to take that baseball bat you're holding, that's your antibody, and you're going to smack them over the head with it and knock them unconscious. So now you've tagged them because they're laying on your floor unconscious, and you can call the killer T cells or the police to come take them away. That might be a little bit oversimplified, but hopefully it kind of helps to make sense of something. All pathogens have unique antigens on their surface, so you're not going to have more than one type of pathogen with the same type of antigen. These antigens are detected by the B cells, which make the antibodies against them. The antibodies bind to the pathogen to deactivate it, and then the killer T cells locate that tagged pathogen and destroys it. Antibodies have all the same basic structure, the same basic backbone of this antigen binding area right here. So antibodies are also specific to the antigens. So this particular antigen binding area of the antibody is only going to bind with this particular kind of antigen and mark that particular pathogen for destruction. Your body also has the capability to remember pathogens from the past because the antibodies stay in the body way longer than after the pathogen has been gone. So if you get the same pathogen again, your body destroys it very quickly. Scientists say that this is what they call immunity. Scientists say that you become immune to that particular pathogen. It's not going to make you sick because your body's going to recognize it and get rid of it before it has a chance to. There's different types of immunity, active and passive, and these are acquired either naturally or artificially. So active immunity, natural active immunity happens when your body produces the antibodies or the T cells after being exposed to a particular antigen. For example, you become ill with the measles, your body will produce antibodies to that particular virus, making you immune to infection in the future. Same principle like for chickenpox. Artificial active immunity results when your body makes the antibodies against a disease as a result of a vaccination, like a tetanus shot or the flu shot. That's artificial active immunity. By injecting a vaccine containing dead or weakened pathogens, the recipient's body, that's you, produces an immune response without actually developing the illness. Natural passive immunity results when a fetus acquires antibodies from the mother through the placenta, or when a baby acquires them through breastfeeding. That's part of why they say breastfeeding is so important, is for the immunity that you can acquire through it. And then artificial passive immunity involves obtaining serum from a person or animal that has produced the antibodies and then injecting that into someone else. This is kind of like treatment of rabies or botulism, or most recently, I think that's how they treated Ebola, was the one doctor who actually survived it. They drew his blood and made an injection from that to inject to other people to help keep them from getting sicker. The last thing we're going to talk about is allergic reaction. This is kind of the same principle as an immune reaction, but a little bit different. When you're exposed to an allergen, the first time your body produces something called IgE. And then the next time you're exposed, your body releases all these histamines and you wind up with a reaction. Now, the reaction can be something like a rash that makes you really itchy. It could be like, hay fever type symptoms, the sneezing, the sniffling, the itchy eyes, the runny nose. And each time you're exposed to that allergen, your reaction is going to become a little more severe. Severe cases are what's known as an anaphylactic reaction. And if you don't treat an anaphylactic reaction quickly enough or efficiently enough, it could result in anaphylactic shock. I think your textbook defines anaphylaxis as a severe immediate reaction to an allergen, and it defines anaphylactic shock is when the symptoms worsen into a circulatory shock and death can occur. Yes, anaphylactic shock can be a fatal thing. It's not something, and it's not pleasant. If you suffer from hay fever, you know how unpleasant it can be. If you have an allergy to a medicine, you know you can break out in a rash. Those rashes will first probably start usually on your trunk, your stomach, and then spread from there. It's horrible. It's miserable. It's not something you want to experience if you can help it. There are ways to treat it and desensitize yourself to it. That's a subject for a whole other class. And then the other thing is autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases are kind of like the body's attacking itself. An example of that I can think of would be like lupus. Severe lupus. Some people with lupus, the body attacks parts of themselves and they wind up in kidney failure. Selena Gomez, actually, I believe that's why she needed to have a transplant, because she has lupus. So your immune system, while kind of small, is very complicated, very difficult to understand, and very important to the functioning of your body. And that's it for this one. I hope this helped to make it a little more sense. Your book goes into way more detail. I don't think that's something that you really need to be able to understand here for our purposes in LPN school. Even RN school, I don't think you're going to get into that much depth in it. And that's it. Thanks.